There's no debate on this episode of Pushback.
Go, 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 Jonny, go, 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 Jonny, go, 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 Jonny, go, go.
If you're concerned about the direction our culture is heading, then maybe it's time to push back.
Greetings, my dear listeners. This is Dr. Jonny, and this is another episode of Pushback. I'm coming to you one day late, which isn't too bad considering that my family and I were out in Montana for family camp, and it was a tremendous time. But I also wanted to wait until after the presidential debate last night, and we're going to talk about that for sure. We were at Revival in the Rockies, is what it's called. It's just outside of Glacier National Park. And we've been going pretty much every year, and Amy and I have been guest speakers at this family camp, talking about all things family and kingdom. And it's such an honor and a privilege to be invited again this year. And I want you to put it on your calendar again for next June, for you and your family. I can't recommend it enough. And God willing, we will be there as speakers again, and enjoying our time there. We were so filled and refreshed. And you can even go online and find some of the messages that were released there. It's so important, I believe, that in this time of technology and even post-COVID, I believe it's so important that we still put value on gathering together. I believe there's maybe even been a loss of momentum in regards to personal gatherings. We can connect now online. COVID has made us more comfortable with social distancing, and yet the Bible tells us that we need each other, that we are drawn together. We're like parts of a body together, and for one to work, the other needs to work. And we can come together and we can edify and we can strengthen each other and we can encourage each other. It's such an important piece of the kingdom. We can use technology to our advantage, but not as a replacement. I'll come back to a little bit about what I spoke about at camp. It's probably not going to surprise you if you're a regular listener, what I spoke about. But it's very interesting transition, because this is episode 26. So I'm halfway through season 5 and transitioning from what I called pseudo-science to politics. And what a perfect example of those on display, in my opinion, last night at the debate. What do I mean by that? I mean that these 4 Ps are the ones that influence our children. And when talking about the things that influence and maybe even kill our kids, if we don't understand the importance of culture and connecting to this piece of fighting and pushing back about the things that we believe in. And when we talk about pseudo-education or pseudo-science, if we compromise the way we teach our children, if we compromise the objective study of science for political gain or for a godless religion, then we have compromised who we are as a society, as a people. We look to education and science to lead and to direct us, to bring new discovery and understanding to our world. But when it's compromised, when it becomes pseudo-education or pseudo-science, influenced by the politics above or the funding created, then it becomes compromised. It becomes something else and something different. Let me just read an article from February 2024. Mr. Biden, whose health has been under scrutiny ahead of November's presidential election, underwent the assessment on Wednesday. White House physician Dr. Kevin O'Connor said that Mr. Biden fully executes all his responsibilities without any exemptions or accommodations. Everything's great, Mr. Biden said. The 81-year-old president received the physical at a military hospital in Maryland and declared himself squared away after the appointment. He said the results were nothing different than last year and quipped that the doctors think I look too young. Mr. Biden, whose last physical was in February 2023, is, quote, healthy, end quote, and vigorous, end quote. And, quote, continues to work out at least 5 days per week, end quote, according to his doctor. We saw something very different last night. And I'm not saying this as a partisan. In fact, this podcast isn't about who you should vote for. I'm not at liberty to say that. And even if I was, I'm not sure that I would. But what we saw last night was objectively very different. And I say that as a scientist, as a medical professional. It was unnerving, to say the least. When he tried to present any type of coherent argument or fact, there were times that I actually felt a little sorry for him. But mostly I felt anger and betrayal. Let me explain what I mean. I believe that the debate last night is going to be very historical and eye-opening to the American public. And not just about the election, but the next 6 to 7 months. See, they've done pretty well in concealing and hiding Joe Biden, but they couldn't do it last night. We saw him in his fullness, and it was unnerving. He's our president for the next 6 to 7 months, and that in and of itself should cause alarm and concern. Let's talk about pseudoscience. I don't see how it's possible that what we saw last night was vigorous and healthy. There was a report when there was an investigation on Joe Biden about his documents in his garage, and the report said that he is a well-meaning, forgetful, elderly man. It pointed to a degree of senility in him. That was a report came by a non-professional investigator. How is it possible then that a professional investigator, such as a physician, would be able to come to a conclusion that they think that Joe Biden looks too young? There's something missing. And I would submit to you that it's called pseudoscience. There is, and there was, pressure for physicians to remove their objectivity and come up with a conclusion that fit the narrative. This should cause concern, and not 7 months from now, but for the next 7 months. There was something clearly off. There was a vacant stare. There was word searching. There was shuffling gait. There was stammering. There was something that wasn't being connected. And the question is, despite all of that, is he able to lead the free world? Is he able to be president? And the rigors and the vigorous demands on his life and body and time. See, I think this makes a perfect transition of topics. Clearly, a physician was compromised because of objective findings for a political narrative. It was reckless and not real science. He needed to be evaluated not as a run-of-the-mill elderly patient, but as the leader of the free world and the demands required on his mind and his body. So when we transition to the third P, which is politics, why had the White House and the Democrat Party concealed this? And the answer is simple. It's current politics, which isn't about the best for the American people, but about re-election, power, and control. That's what it's about. See, Biden is a puppet in the hands of those with an extreme liberal agenda, and they were hoping that he could just, quote, hold the spot long enough to continue the agenda. But they miscalculated. And this, in my opinion, has compromised our country. We're compromised. That's dangerous. And it's not in the best interest of the American people. It was only in the interest of re-election, power, and control. See, in our current political environment, these are called calculable risks. Why do they let illegal immigrants flood across the border? We have to ask why. We haven't been given any type of explanation for why there would be any kind of resistance to enforce border patrol. And the answer can only be one. The only plausible answer is that it increases the total Democrat votes during an election cycle. That's it. It's the only explanation. And that speaks to the current political environment, which are 4-year cycles. It puts us at risk and destroys our economy. Why would they do that? And the answer is re-election, power, and control. That's the answer. See, I am for, and this podcast is all about, vigorous debate of ideas. That's not what we saw last night. I am confident that the kingdom of heaven has the best quote-unquote ways of living. And this should be debated. I should have to defend that as my position, as my ambassadorial status, as well as my citizen status, as well as my personal status. I should defend that from the status of being a personality on a podcast that's making claims. And I believe that I can. And I believe that I can put words to the notion that what we have and what we do as people of the kingdom are the best ways. Let me tell you how. Let me tell you how we can implement that and why we should implement that. Let me show you facts and data that support that. That's what we do. That's called vigorous debate in our country. That's not what we saw last night. See, I love the word ambassador, and not surprisingly, this is what I talked about at camp. And if you're a new listener from camp that got onto my podcast because of my message this last week at family camp, Revival in the Rockies, I welcome you. And thank you for being part of this podcast. Let me give you the definition of what an ambassador does. In Chronicles, it says that we are ambassadors of heaven, and that we actually represent his purposes here on this earth, that he's actually entrusted us with the assignment of reconciliation. That's a big deal. And you hear me mention the term so often that we're ambassadors of Christ. We're the ones that carry his message here on this earth because he's, the Bible says, entrusted us with it. So an ambassador is a person, especially a diplomat, invested with full power of independent action on behalf of their government, typically in a foreign country. See, we are ambassadors of heaven. We connect to this earth, not as earthly beings hoping for heavenly visitations, but we are heavenly beings on an earthly visitation and an assignment. Ambassadors, they actively manage and maintain diplomatic relationships between the home country, which is heaven, and the host, which is the kingdom of this world. Listen, they engage, please hear this word, engage. They engage in political and economic negotiations. They promote bilateral cooperation. And listen, they safeguard the home country's interest in the host country. Let me read that again. They safeguard the home country's kingdom of heaven, their interest in the host country, the kingdom of this world. Ambassadors are diplomats of the highest rank, formally representing their head of state, with full authority to represent the government. They have plenipotentiary powers. Say that 3 times fast. Plenipotentiary powers, which means full authority. That's what we have. That's what we've been sent to do here on this earth. So how is that significant? We are supposed to engage in the political arena. We are supposed to inject ourselves into the story of this world, not to be succumbed by the world, not to be influenced by the world, not to be tempted by the world, but to be the influencers, to be the light, to be the ones that show and demonstrate and communicate his ways. Our first set of P's that influence our children, our parents, I believe it's the most powerful aspect of our culture is family and parents. Nobody cares about our children as much as we do. I talked about pseudo-education and pseudo-science. We're transitioning from that topic and how that is supposed to bring influence, but when it's compromised, when it becomes not about real science, not about real education, but about agenda, our children are compromised. And the third P that we're transitioning into is that of politics and politicians. See, we need to be able to see through the agenda of control, and stand up for what is right and push back. That's what we're here. That's why we're talking about this. That's why this is so important, because our children are at stake. At family camp, a dear friend of mine, Tim Davies, talked about niceness. And he explained that niceness is not a fruit of the Spirit. Kindness is, but not niceness. The church needs to stop being nice. It doesn't accomplish his purposes here on this earth. He also explained that compliance is not a fruit of the Spirit. When Jesus went into the temple and flipped over the tables, he wasn't being nice, but he was being kind and courageous. And that's what the church is being called to. Please hear me in this. Politics is not an institution. It's an arena. It's a venue for debate, for resistance, for checks and balances, even experimentation. It's not created by our founding fathers for control, manipulation, concealment, or exploitation. Politics, in the realm of politics, is for a voice, not veneration. A voice to be heard, not veneration to bow down. We bow down before God and God only. But politics is for the people. It's supposed to be for the people. It was founded on the people, where we have a voice and that we be heard. And if we're not being heard and we don't have a voice and something is wrong, and we need to push back, and we may even need to be not nice. Because that's what we're called to as ambassadors, to represent the interests of heaven. And what I saw last night did not represent the interests of heaven. When politics are about these things, control, power, manipulation, concealment, it actually influences or ignores the next generation, which is a key factor of culture. The sum total ways of living passed down from generation to generation. Because it only becomes about 4-year cycles. We don't think generationally. They think politically, which are in 4-year chunks. And my friends, I am so bold to say I believe that that's killing our kids. And we need to stand up as ambassadors of heaven for the interests of heaven. The interest of heaven is that of reconciliation, reconciling this world to God. That's our interest. And we need to do everything in our power to broker that interest, to represent that interest, because we've been entrusted with that interest from heaven itself. And I believe that we can do it. I believe that we have to do it. And I believe last night was a wake-up call for this country to bring to light the things that matter on this earth. Whether we like it or not, our kids are influenced by politics and the policies of politics. So we need to not just be reactionary, although we do need to react, but we also need to be injected into the conversation, which may mean that you, my listener, may need to be a politician. It's not just about changing politics, it's about having vested interest to enter into the arena to be heard. And I believe that's our call, and that's our mission here on earth. Thank you for listening to me again today. You can go to pushbackculture.org, pushbackculture.org. If you want to leave a message or a comment or a question about this topic or others, I would love to hear from you, maybe even share them on the air and continue the discussion, the open debate about what's happening, what happened last night, and what's going to happen going forward. I would love to hear your comments. You can also go to gofam.org and find excellent resources for you and your family, because family, I believe, is culture's last stand. So with that being said, let's go together now to set and shape the culture.